peace be upon you. Let me take everything we have covered, from part 3 to part 29, and weave it into a single image, not as a staircase of separate steps, but as one continuous carpet. A whole field, a whole atmosphere, a whole silent ground you can feel under your feet. Because what we have been doing is not explaining a thing. We have been doing something rarer. We have been building the conditions under which anything can be explained at all. And that is why this episode feels different. We are not yet in the world of stars and galaxies, not yet in the world of forces and particles, not yet even in the world of time and space. We are in the world before the world, before the stage exists, before the script exists, before the actors exist, where only one question matters. What makes reality readable? Not readable to me alone, not readable to you alone, but readable in a way that can be shared, tested, reconstructed, corrected, public. That is the heart of the Holophase science. Not storytelling first, but prediction first. Not metaphysics as decoration, but metaphysics as a firewall. Not beauty without discipline, but beauty with teeth. Imagine a universe that has not yet learned how to speak, but is already carrying the permission to speak. Not a particle, not a field, not energy, not space, not time. Not even existence in the ordinary sense. Just the first permission. The permission that this could be distinguished from that. That permission is what we named phi. And the first shock, if you truly let it land, is that phi is not a difference. It is not the event of separation. It is not a cut, a crack, a split, a rupture. Phi is quieter than that. Phi is the capacity for separation. It is the difference between a locked door and an unlocked door. The door can still be closed. Nothing has to pass through yet. But the possibility has appeared. It could be opened. This matters because if you try to build a universe without that permission, you cannot even begin. You cannot even ask the first question. Because every question already contains two sides. Yes, no. Is, isn't. Same, different. Here, there. This is why part 3 wasn't a poetic introduction. It was a falsifiable claim disguised as a story. Prediction at the core. Every meaningful statement anyone can ever make, scientific or personal, relies on comparability somewhere, even if it hides it. Falsification at the core. Build a public science that makes verifiable claims while never using any form of sameness, difference, equivalence, non-equivalence, identity, non-identity. The moment such a science exists, this foundation collapses. And notice how brutal the falsification is. It isn't, I disagree. It's, show me the operational method. That is our discipline. Now, if phi is the first permission, part 4 delivered the second shock. Phi is pre-ontological, meaning phi comes before the question, does it exist? Because the question, does it exist, is already written in the ink of distinction. Exists is separated from does not exist. The question is already standing on the ground it is trying to evaluate. So phi cannot be treated like an object that exists. It cannot be treated like a thing among things, because the category thing among things is already downstream of phi. This is why the most dangerous mistake in the history of thought is not a wrong answer. It is a wrong starting point. If you begin by assuming there are things, you have already smuggled in a universe of distinctions. You have already paid with phi without admitting you paid. And the firewall demands we admit what we paid. So we say, phi is not a thing that exists. Phi is the condition under which exists becomes a meaningful contrast at all. Now part 5, tighten the blade even more. Phi is not difference itself. Phi is possibility, not outcome. In daily life, this seems obvious, but in metaphysics, it is everything. A musical instrument can contain the possibility of music without any music playing. A traffic light can contain the possibility of red versus green before any bulb ever turns on. A blank ruler can contain the possibility of measurement before it ever touches an object. And in the same way, the universe can contain the possibility of distinction before any particular distinction ever occurs. That is the undifferentiated silent ground, not emptiness, but permission. Now, the moment you accept this, a new danger appears, a very subtle danger. If phi is this foundational, then the human mind starts craving an absolute. So, what is phi absolutely? What is its value? Where is the universe's phase dial set right now? And part 6 exists to break that addiction. Part 6 said, absolute phi is operationally meaningless. Only relations are real. And this isn't just a philosophical preference. It is a claim about measurement itself. Measurement is comparison, always. Even when you think you are measuring one thing, you are comparing it to a reference, a ruler, a clock, a standard sample, a calibration, a detector threshold, a baseline noise floor, a prior measurement, a control group. You are never touching the absolute. You are building a relation that can be reconstructed by others. So the universe cannot provide an absolute phase reading that stands alone, because to be public, it must be comparable. And to be comparable, it must have a reference. And the moment it has a reference, it is relational. This is why we called it gauge relational essence. If you shift the entire phase by a constant, if you add the same offset to everything, nothing public should change. That is not a technical footnote. It is the principle that prevents hidden absolutes from sneaking into the foundation. So here again, the spine appears. Prediction. No experiment will ever detect absolute phi. Only differences and invariant encodings will survive. Falsification. Build a reproducible device that outputs the absolute phase of the universe with no reference frame, and allow others to verify it independently. That is not unlikely. That is conceptually impossible if our claims are correct. Which means this is not poetry. It is a hard constraint. Now, part 7 asked, if phi cannot be shared as an absolute, how can it become public at all? And here the story becomes almost tender. Because public knowledge is not just truth. It is truth that survives translation. You can feel something privately that no one else can verify. You can dream something that no one else can enter. But science is built from what survives the crossing, what can be carried from mind to mind without becoming an opinion. So part 7 said, phi can only appear publicly through a gauge invariant carrier, through an encoding that does not change when you shift the background reference. And we gave it a name, the public carrier. In the simplest representation, it looks like e to the I phi, a form that is already clean against shifts. But even if a listener forgets the mathematics, they will remember the law. You don't share private phase, you share what survives the change of language. And that is why interference patterns, closure effects, and relational encoders keep showing up in physics. Because they are the kinds of things that remain true when the reference frame slides. So we are building a universe where publicness is not an afterthought. It is the architecture. Now part 8, turn the image from relational to structural. Phi lives on a loop, not on a line, not on an infinite ruler of ever-increasing values, on a circle. This changes everything because circles carry a moral of their own: closure. A circle is not almost returning, it is returning. When you complete a loop, you come back exactly, not approximately, to the same equivalence class. And that one fact, closure, creates a bridge from continuity to discreteness without forcing it. Because closure can force integer invariance, whole counts, winding numbers, full turns. This is why we keep saying, quietly but insistently, once the universe becomes readable in loops, quantization becomes not a magical add-on, but a mathematical inevitability. Prediction. Whenever we later trace complete closures in the differentiated world, integers will appear as invariants of that closure. Falsification. Derive fundamental discrete invariants from a strictly linear non-closure structure without smuggling discreteness through hidden constraints. Now, part 9 made the universe even more realistic. If phi is circle-valued, then it might not be globally chartable by one clean function everywhere. In other words, reality may require an atlas. Just like Earth cannot be drawn on one flat page without distortion, the universe may not allow one global chart of phi without mismatch. So we introduced the bundle section reality. Phi can be locally defined cleanly, but globally stitched. This is where the story begins to feel like weaving for real, because a carpet is not always woven from one unbroken thread. Sometimes sections are worked, then joined. The artistry is not destroyed by the patching. The artistry is proven by the stitching. And here is the firewall stance. If reality demands patches, that is not a failure. It is a feature of non-trivial topology. It is the universe refusing simplistic global narratives. Now part 10 removed a deeper smuggling attempt. We do not begin inside space-time. Because if you begin inside space-time, you are assuming the stage before you have earned the stage. So we say, phi's domain is an abstract event set. An unstructured, there are events, without distance, without time, without geometry. This is one of the most radical moves in the whole program, and it is easy to miss how disciplined it is. We are not saying space-time is an illusion as a dramatic statement. We are saying space-time is a reading, a derived grammar, a way of organizing relational structure once the system differentiates. So again, prediction. Geometry will be derived from phi patterns. It will not be assumed as the container. Falsification. Prove that spacetime must exist before phi can be meaningfully defined, without using spacetime language circularly in the proof. Now part 11 and part 12 performed a subtle double move. Part 11 said, where phi is defined, it is smooth enough to be describable locally. Smoothness as consistency. Not smoothness as aesthetic decoration. Smoothness as the reason we can approximate, model, and compress. If local reality were infinitely jagged, if every point were independent of every neighbor, then no finite theory would exist. No science would exist. Prediction would collapse into noise because the world would have no continuity to exploit. So smoothness becomes an operational requirement for readability. It is the reason finite information can track local behavior. Then part 12 opened the depth. Phi has infinite jet potential, infinite descriptive refinement. You can keep asking finer questions about how phi changes, and the vocabulary never truly ends. Zoom into a leaf, then into a cell, then into molecules, then into atoms, then into fields, then into deeper structure. No obvious bottom. And here the firewall is again sharp. Infinite depth does not mean infinite access. We can be surrounded by bottomless structure and still be finite beings reading finite sentences. This was already whispering the next half of episode 13. The seals, the windows, the coherence thresholds. Because once you admit infinite depth, you must admit the rule that protects you from fantasy. You will always hit a ceiling where more detail stops improving prediction. That ceiling is coherence. So part 12 carried a prediction that sounds like humility, but is actually a test. Prediction. Higher order structure improves prediction only up to a coherence limited ceiling. Beyond that, you are feeding noise. Falsification. Show that higher derivatives always improve prediction without limit, with no coherent ceiling, forever, across systems, without overfitting. Now part 13 returned us to the simplest discipline. Absolute phi cannot be measured. Only differences speak. Even if you had infinite instruments, the act of measurement is a relational act. The very concept of reading is comparative. So we do not build a metaphysics that demands the impossible. We build one that respects what measurement is. Now part 14 delivered another quiet but decisive firewall. Phi has no intrinsic dynamics. Phi is grammar before story. It is not yet a law of motion. It is not yet a cosmic script. It does not want to evolve. This matters because the human mind again wants to smuggle teleology. Surely the foundation must already point toward a specific universe. No. The foundation is what makes universes possible, not what selects one universe. This is why we keep saying, multiple admissible dynamics can be consistent with the same undifferentiated ground. Now part 15, part 16, and part 17 stripped away the last temptation to reclassify phi into familiar categories. Phi is timeless and spaceless, not because it is mystical, but because time and space are later readouts of differentiation. Phi is neither mental nor physical, because the mind-matter split is a downstream classification, a later bifurcation inside the derivative language. Phi is not a substance or field, because substance already assumes quantities, locations, amounts, and intrinsic properties that can be measured absolutely. And we have already ruled those out as smuggling. So what is phi? Not a thing, not stuff, not a ghost, not a law, a permission structure, a capacity, a comparability ground. Now we reach the most beautiful part of the weave, because the story stops being abstract and becomes intimate. Part 18 said, logic presupposes phi. You cannot say A equals A without an identity relation. You cannot say not A without a boundary. You cannot say implies without comparing conditions. You cannot say contradiction without distinguishing truth from falsehood. So phi is not only the ground of physics, it is the ground of reasoning itself. And part 19 said, information presupposes phi. One bit is one distinction. A traffic light is informative only because red is not green. A message is meaningful only because symbols are distinguishable. Entropy counts distinguishable states. So phi is not only the ground of logic, it is the ground of information, and therefore the ground of communication, memory, computation, and knowledge. Then part 20 brought the story into the human heart. Objectivity is shared comparability. A fact is not what one person feels. A fact is what survives translation across observers, methods, and contexts. Two thermometers that agree create objectivity. Two laboratories that replicate create objectivity. Two cultures that describe the same mountain in different languages create objectivity. So objectivity is not coldness. Objectivity is community. It is the shared carrier. Then part 21 said, truth is what survives repeated comparison. Truth is not an absolute oracle. Truth is a claim that keeps matching inside its scope. And here the firewall again. Claims without scope and uncertainty decay into myth. If you cannot say where your claim applies and how precisely it holds, your claim is not wrong, it is unlicensed. Then part 22 made this ethical. Comparability implies accountability. If you make claims but refuse comparison, you're not doing science. You're asking for belief. And belief is not evil, but belief is not a public epistemic engine. It is not falsification first. It is not prediction first. So the ethical imperative isn't morality added at the end. It is baked into the logic of comparability itself. Now, part 23 and part 24 drew the boundaries of reality. A reality without phi is incoherent. A world you cannot distinguish from nothing is not a world. And within any coherent universe, there is one comparability structure, one phi, because multiple indistinguishable phis collapse into one effective structure, and distinguishable multiple phis fragment coherence. So phi is necessary for any readable reality, and unique within any coherent one. Then part 25 saved us from another mistake. Phi is not mathematics itself. Mathematics is a language of pattern. Phi is the condition that makes pattern detectability possible. Math describes, phi enables. And part 26 removed the last romantic temptation. Phi is not teleological. It has no purpose. It does not aim. Purpose emerges later inside complex self-referential patterns, not in the silent ground. Then part 27 brought us to the edge. If you remove everything, objects, fields, laws, space-time, even the mind-matter split, what remains is the capacity for distinction. Not a thing, but the possibility of a thing. And part 28 closed the circle of questioning. Why something rather than nothing is a question that presupposes phi, because it already contrasts something with nothing. So the deepest why cannot get behind the permission it uses to ask. Finally, part 29, the negative seal, built the border wall. Phi is not matter, not energy, not space-time, not consciousness, not an object, not a substance, not a hidden absolute dial. Because every time you try to turn phi into one of those, you secretly smuggle in what we have forbidden: absolute observables, unlicensed primitives, untestable essence, narrative drift. So the negative seal is not negativity, it is protection. It is the end of childhood metaphysics. It is the moment the foundation becomes firewalled. And now, here is the crucial moment. You can feel why listeners might think we are done. Because we have already achieved something huge. We have built a unified picture of undifferentiated phi as the silent permission structure from which all readable reality can arise. We have shown what it must be, what it cannot be, what it enables, and what it forbids. We have given it predictions and falsifications, not as decoration, but as proof that this is not just a pawn. We have been hinting again and again that the next movement is differentiation. That once phi becomes readable as change, the derivative language opens. The first differential face appears, and with it, the triunity readouts that build time, space, and motion. We have said many times, we will begin differentiation. And yes, we will. But now comes the moment of maturity. Because what we are attempting next is not a small continuation. We are attempting pure phi cosmogenesis, a full cosmological program derived from the minimal primitive without smuggling, without metaphysical shortcuts, without borrowing hidden assumptions from the old story of the universe. This is not just another interpretation of modern cosmology. It is a new kind of project, perhaps the first of its kind in the history of thought, because it is trying to build cosmogenesis under a strict firewall. Prediction first, falsification ready, window licensed, public, reconstructible. And that means something very demanding. Before we let phi differentiate, we must certify that our foundation is not only meaningful, but usable. Not only beautiful, but operational. Not only coherent in the mind, but coherent under public reconstruction. This is why what comes next, parts 31 through 47, is not adding new primitives. It is not patching holes in phi. It is installing the safety locks that make phi cosmogenesis possible without degenerating into story time. Because a cathedral can be magnificent and still fail an engineering inspection. So we are about to do an inspection that is itself part of the science. We will place seals. We will state explicitly the discipline of humility. So we do not pretend we have captured phi as an object. We will state the axiom of windows. So we do not speak as if public facts exist everywhere without boundaries. We will state coherence thresholds. So we know where signal ends and noise begins. We will state finite access. So we do not confuse infinite depth with infinite reach. We will demand estimation discipline. So claims come with uncertainty budgets and replication protocols. We will restrict public observables to finite jet functionals, so we do not require infinite derivatives as a hidden cheat. We will define comparator-based publicness, so science means reconstructible, not merely asserted. We will enforce extensionality, so no hidden essence is allowed behind identical observational encoders. We will impose parsimony, so no extra structure is smuggled in before dynamics. We will seal no intrinsic units, no scales in the silent ground, so meters and seconds are earned later, not assumed now. We will justify topological inevitability, so circles, closures, and quantization are not slogans, but necessities. We will state the pure capacity seal, 0 internal degrees, so constants are not magically pulled from phi alone. We will expose latent self-applicability, so self-reference is seen as inherent potential, not a mystical later intrusion. We will seal metaphysical necessity and exhaustiveness, so deeper than phi proposals are tested against operational coherence. We will formalize irreducibility as a theorem, not a vibe. And we will end with a completeness proof, systematic verification, that we are licensed to hand off to differentiation without begging for new primitives later. Only then, only after the locks click, do we have the right to begin pure phi cosmogenesis. So what we have covered is the silent ground as meaning. What remains is the silent ground as certification. And once that certification is complete, the differentiation movement that we have been promising will not feel like a leap. It will feel like a door opening that has been prepared for a long time. The universe will finally be allowed to speak, not as a myth, not as an inherited narrative, but as a disciplined derivative language rising from the most minimal permission. So yes, listener, you have been hearing the promise of differentiation, and you will get it. But first, we do what the first true cosmogenesis program must do. We prove we are not cheating. We build a foundation so deep, so firewalled, so unshakable, that when we finally take the derivative, when we finally let the first readable change occur, the entire cosmos that follows will be earned, not assumed. Salam.